Tonight, we step back in time, back through layers of fog and parchment, through the cobbled corridors of memory, into a palace dimly lit by flickering candles. The fire is low, the night air is cold, and far from the clamor of battle or crown, lies a single room in Berkeley Castle. There, hidden behind thick stone walls and iron-banded doors, waits a man no longer called king. His name was Edward of Carnarvon. Edward, son of a conqueror. Edward, whose throne slipped away not with fire but with silence. In this story, there are no trumpets, no golden halls, only whispers in hallways, and eyes that look away. This is a tale of quiet decline, of a monarch not remembered for war, but for how he ended. A fading presence in a cold room, wrapped not in robes of state, but in the weight of forgetting. Let us dim the lights now, slow our breathing, and step softly through the corridors of Berkeley Castle, for there, behind a wooden door, the story of Edward II drifts like smoke into the stillness of night. The year is 1327. England is old by then, its castles aged and moss-lined, its fields damp and wide. The roads are muddy, the winds sweep low from the moors. In the villages, the people are quiet, resigned and poor. London hums, but it is not the London of today. It is a city of towers and soot, with bridges lined by shingled houses. Merchants speak in hushed tones. Monks walk in long robes, their hoods drawn low. The crown rests uneasy. The memory of Edward I, the mighty hammer of the Scots, still hangs in the air. He was a builder of castles, breaker of wills. His son, Edward II, was nothing like him. Where his father carved stone, Edward wandered. Where his father ruled by law, Edward leaned into personal affection. He was not born for war. He was born for something softer, perhaps too soft. The court around him was anxious. Earls and bishops and barons spoke in circles, always waiting, watching. The king's choices unsettled them. The Queen, Isabella of France, watched too. Outside the palace, the people sowed barley and beans. They whispered about taxes, about wool prices, about the odd silence in the castle. The sky, often gray, seemed to match the mood of the nation. Berkeley Castle itself stood like a brooding figure along the river Severn. Its windows were small, its walls thick, its courtyards narrow. It was not a place of celebration. It was a place of containment. Of waiting. And that is where Edward would spend his final days. Before the stone walls of Berkeley closed around him, Edward lived in rhythms all his own. He rose not with dawn, but when the sky turned pewter, a soft light through fogged glass. His attendants would open heavy curtains, letting in air cool. And still, his robes were often blue, the shade of midnight. They were lined with fur. Even in spring, he disliked the cold, though he was often surrounded by it. He rarely wore his crown. It sat quietly on a carved oak chest, beside a warm prayer book and a polished bowl of figs. Mornings were slow. There were no roaring greetings or loud declarations, only a silent procession of servants, one to dress him, one to fetch warm water, one to prepare bread and cheese. He liked bread that was soft, cheese that smelled faintly of herbs. His meals were plain, always the same. Predictability comforted him. He spoke little, but wrote often. His letters were not grand, but thoughtful. He once sent a cloak to a knight who had protected him in youth, long after the man had been forgotten by the court. In the afternoons, he walked, not briskly, not far, just from one side of the cloister to the other, listening to the clack of boots on stone, counting the windows, feeling the sun when it dared show itself. He liked music, but only from strings. No horns, no drums, a single harp, sometimes played behind a curtain. He feared storms. When thunder rolled, he would retreat, close his shutters, douse the candles, lay still, not sleeping, just waiting. He trusted few. His favorite attendants were the ones who said nothing, who folded his garments just so, who bowed, but did not stare. Sometimes he whispered to himself, not words, just soft sounds, like birds in sleep. And always there was the stillness. His days were wrapped in quiet, his evenings in repetition. A chessboard never touched, a goblet never emptied, a fire that burned low and slow. He was a king in name, but in practice, a man seeking calm, not the kind of calm found in celebration, but the kind that hides in shadows, in silence, in carefully chosen routines. And in those routines, the world outside began to fade. It did not come all at once. There was no fever, no cough, no sudden fainting. It began instead with a stillness deeper than sleep. His servants noticed first the way Edward would sit, unmoving, long after the fire had died, eyes open, hands folded, unblinking. He began to hum to himself long, slow hums, not songs, just a single note, rising and falling like a bell tolling in fog. He would stare at corners, especially when no one else looked. Once, he asked if they heard footsteps, but none were there. One evening, as rain whispered against the windows, Edward asked the candle to be moved farther away. "Too bright," he said. Though the flame was barely visible, he began sleeping during the day and pacing at night, long, aimless pacing, slippers dragging on stone, sometimes pausing, staring at nothing. He stopped writing. His letters were left unfinished, his quill untouched. He murmured to himself more often now. Names no one recognized. Names he whispered into folded cloth. And one day, he refused to eat. "The bread is watching," he muttered. The royal physician, old and tired, offered prayers and warm wine. But Edward drank only cold water. The queen, far away by then, was sent word. But no answer came. They began to keep the windows covered. The light hurt his eyes. He stopped calling for his favorite harp. He flinched at voices. He asked that no one enter without knocking 3 times, exactly 3. Always 3. At night, he'd stack books in front of his door, not to read, but to block the dreams. No one truly knew what haunted him. Perhaps guilt, perhaps madness, or perhaps something quieter, something that had followed him since the crown first touched his head. He would say it was the castle whispering his name, and slowly, Edward began to fade. At first, the whispers were quiet, just murmurs in the halls, a concerned glance between servants, a chamberlain pausing too long before knocking. But soon, even the noblest in Edward's diminished circle could not ignore it. The once king was not merely silent now. He was slipping. The Bishop of Hereford was summoned. He brought holy water, a soft-spoken monk, and a relic wrapped in velvet. He entered the room with lowered eyes and left without a word. "It is not illness," he later said. "It is sorrow made flesh." Others disagreed. The castle physician, hunched and anxious, consulted old texts. He spoke of imbalance of humors, bile and melancholy. He recommended leeches. No one dared use them. Isabella, still queen in title, received the reports but offered no reply. Her silence rang louder than any order. Even the guards at Edward's chamber changed how they stood. No longer upright and firm. Now they leaned, uncertain, as if guarding something fragile rather than fallen. Some nights, the steward lit a candle outside the door, a quiet signal. On those nights, none entered. There were rumors among the kitchen hands that Edward no longer cast a shadow, that the fire would not warm him, that his footsteps made no sound. A boy sent to deliver linen said he heard Edward singing, but when he entered, the room was still. The song unfinished. Edward had no official visitors. The council had no more use for a man without power. Still, some felt pity. A priest left a rosary on the sill. A maid tucked a sprig of lavender beneath his pillow. Small comforts for a man who no longer asked. They began to speak of him in the past tense. And all through the castle, the question lingered unspoken. Was the king dying, or already gone? The days grew shorter, the air colder. Edward no longer left his chambers. The great hall was swept, but never used. Meals were placed on trays and left untouched. He sat often by the narrow window. Though it barely let in light, a thick curtain was drawn across at most hours at his request. Once a king, now a figure barely moving, barely speaking. He feared mirrors. One was removed after he turned it to the wall. "It does not reflect," he said softly. "It remembers." The fire in his room was never allowed to go out, and yet he was always cold. He asked for more furs, for extra wool, for the fire to be built higher. Still, he shivered. He asked fewer questions. He gave no answers. He stopped wearing shoes. Each morning, a servant folded them neatly. Each evening, they remained untouched. Candles burned low throughout the day. Sometimes he would count them. Other times he asked they all be extinguished at once. He whispered still, not to others but to the walls, to the corners, to the shadows. Once, he asked for a bowl of earth. When it was brought to him, he placed his hand into it and said, "This is the only thing that listens." His books remained closed. His robes hung where they were placed. He refused to be bathed. Silence settled over the castle like a fog. Even those tasked with his care walked more softly now. Their faces were downturned. Their words were few. When the wind howled through the towers, Edward seemed to follow its path with his eyes. He no longer responded to his name. He no longer signed documents. He no longer blinked when the light shifted. It was as if the castle itself had swallowed him bit by bit until only a shape remained. Breathing, waiting, and the stone remembered. The last days came without warning. There was no proclamation, no physician's final judgment, only a quiet morning when Edward did not rise. He remained beneath the heavy wool blankets, eyes open, unfocused, his breath shallow, his skin pale and waxen in the candlelight. The room had not changed. It never did. But something inside it had. He no longer whispered. No longer stared at corners. No longer watched the candlelight flicker on the ceiling. He simply existed, faintly, as if he were already slipping beneath the stone floor below. The priest visited, sitting silently at his bedside. He read soft Latin verses, barely audible above the crackling hearth. A handmaid set a cup of water beside him. He did not touch it. No one dared speak loudly. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath. Some said they heard him speak just once. "Forgive me," he might have whispered, but to whom? No one knew. That night, the wind blew through the arrow slits. A candle by the door sputtered out. The guard stood close but said nothing. The fire burned low. A shadow moved along the wall, though none had passed out by dawn. Edward was still. His chest did not rise. His fingers had curled gently around a bit of cloth, his old royal seal, worn smooth from years untouched. The silence that followed was complete. And for the first time in months, the room felt empty. He was gone. No thunder, no morning crowds, no trumpet or bell, only soft footsteps down the corridor and the closing of a door. The king had passed, and Berkeley Castle returned to its quiet waiting. They found him at dawn. The room was still. A chill had settled in the stone. The fire had died, leaving only pale embers beneath the grate. The priest was called first. He entered without shoes, his steps soft on the floor. He laid a hand on Edward's forehead, then whispered the final rites. His body was not moved at once. Instead, candles were brought in, 12 of them, one for each apostle. Their flames danced in the silence. The chamber was sealed for a time. A velvet cloth was draped across the door. No one disturbed him. Not yet. Outside, the wind softened. A drizzle fell over the gray slates of Berkeley Castle. By afternoon, word had reached the nearby parishes. Bells did not ring, not for a king who had long been considered absent, but prayers were spoken. His body was washed by handmaidens in silence. No songs, no incense, only water warmed by the hearth and linen cut from the robes he once wore. They wrapped him in wool, not royal cloth, just plain, unmarked wool. A small procession was arranged. No banners, no trumpets, just for horses, 2 carts, and 6 men who spoke only when needed. The road to Gloucester was wet. The wheels turned slowly through the mud. At Gloucester Abbey, a tomb had been prepared, modest, set into the floor beneath an old window. The light there was soft, filtered through aged glass. The stone that marked him bore no title at first, only a name. Later, others would come and add more words like martyr or king. But in those first days, he was simply Edward. A monk sat near his grave for 3 nights, reading aloud from Psalms, just in case his soul still lingered nearby. In the castle he left behind, the servants returned to their tasks. The fire was lit once more, the chamber cleaned, the window unshuttered, but nothing felt quite the same. Some say the room remains cold, even in summer. Others say the candles there never burn quite evenly. And sometimes, when the wind rattles the door, the servants pause. Just for a moment, because some names echo long after they're spoken. even when whispered in stone. So now, the story has quieted. Edward II, once crowned, once cheered, once feared, has returned to the stillness from which he came, not with a legacy carved in victory, nor a name carried proudly through the ages, but with a whisper, a breath, in the stone, a presence felt more than remembered. He ruled, and he fell. He wandered halls once lined with color, only to end behind shuttered windows. Yet in his silence, there is something soft, something nearly holy, a lesson in humility, and how a life might fade not with fire, but with fog. And so, we leave him, buried beneath the abbey floor, surrounded by quiet prayers and old glass, a soul perhaps still lingering in the cold corners of Berkeley Castle, or gone entirely to dreams. Let us rest now. Let us let the stone cover the tale. Let the candles burn low. Let the wind pass gently through the towers, because all kings sleep, and all stories, no matter how loud they once were, eventually end in hushed. Good night, Edward. Good night to you as well. Sleep deeply, and may your dreams be quiet tonight.